Hello and welcome to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw pretty darn bad. Today I thought I would talk about something a little different and talk about a popular essay that was making the rounds in early December. This video was supposed to be released a long time ago, but I still think this topic is absolutely worth talking about because the issues described in this essay we're going to be reading today aren't really going anywhere. So let's talk about them. So this popular essay was making the rounds in early December, and whoo boy, it got a lot of people talking about men and reading and literacy. And why men aren't reading is in the news again because of, the most recent political American election. And now people have decided maybe adults, especially young male adults, need to read. I think people think the answer to all of their political problems is that men need to learn how to read. So let's read together today's essay, The Disappearance of Literary Men Should Worry Everyone by David J. Morris. Let's go paragraph by paragraph through this essay. First paragraph. Over the last 2 decades, literary fiction has become a largely female pursuit. Novels are increasingly written by women and read by women. In 2004, about half of the authors on the New York Times fiction bestseller list were women and about half men. This year, the list looks more than 3/4 women. According to multiple reports, women readers now account for about 80% of fiction sales. So I think the main point of this essay, and especially in the opening paragraph, which is really controversial, women read way more than men, and the changing demographics of women reading way more than men should be a concern for us. And that this is maybe like a new and alarming trend that we should be worried about. I do think the subtext, however, of this essay is that we are missing literary men, specifically white literary men. And that, to me, has some problems. Because novels has always been a primarily female audience, and I'm not sure I could be convinced otherwise. Women who are just as good as reading nonfiction as men, or prefer nonfiction as much as men, women readers, at least by today's standards, are interested in specific genres, and we can tell this based on the kind of books that are sold and who those books are sold to, because we have certain marketing information about who reads books, just like the author notes. And novels which are fiction have a specific purpose. So what is the purpose of a novel? And what is the purpose of fiction? And I think you could come up with lots of great answers, but one of them is for escapism from your current reality, another one is for reading pleasure, and another one is to experience emotions that you might not normally experience, therefore in the realm of empathy, or perhaps sympathy, depending on where you fit on that spectrum of experiencing things. The first idea I really want to talk about in this essay is the idea that there are literary young men. And the problem I have with the idea of a literary young man, or a man who reads, is what is that man reading, and what should he be reading compared to what women are reading? And I have to ask this because I really honestly believe that men and women read very different things, in the same way that men and women watch very different TV shows. Are you honestly going to tell me that reality TV is dominated by a viewership audience that is mostly male? No, that's just simply not true. I don't even need to go look it up to know that's not true. In the same way, there are topics that appeal to men, and specifically young men, that might not initially appeal to all young women. Now, you could make plenty of arguments about why this is, but specifically when talking about reading and what young men like to read and what young women like to read, there's a clear divide because their interests are different. According to an article released in 2013 on gendered reading habits, there's a lot of information about why young boys, and then eventually men, read. However, the topics that young boys are interested in are things that definitely sound like a gendered topic. So things like spaceships, or dinosaurs, or maybe even sports. Men might read these books about sports and dinosaurs, but they might not read a book about deep relationships unless it's about the deep relationship between Bruce Willis and his daughter in the movie Armageddon. Women read more than men, and that this is alarming. But actually, if you look at all media As well, according to Nielsen statistics, women also watch more TV than men. According to Nielsen, and this is in the United States, women watch an average of 16 more hours of television per week than men. However, note that this excludes things like watching clips on your phone or certain kinds of sports clips that are available on alternative media like YouTube or TikTok. If you specifically look at women's programming, because I think it's really important to talk about what kind of media we consume, not just that we read, but what are we reading or what are we consuming, TV and other media have great statistics to help us understand the correlation between the kinds of things we consume on a daily basis. Women's programming, like the W Network or the Hallmark Channel, are specifically towards traditional male-female relationships, and take from that what you will. This is because companies want to market towards women specifically about things that they say they want, and companies are very good at understanding what do people want. And if you take sort of the top level view, since that's what the author of this essay is doing, of what men are watching, then what men are watching are shows about space or dinosaurs or automobiles. In the same way, there are specific niches and genres dedicated to what I think what would be a male-dominated audience for different kinds of books and literature. To say that women are increasingly getting into fiction, I think is false. I think women have always been very interested in the traditional novel, and women are very interested in books that are commonly written in traditional novel form. So whether it's fantasy, romance, thriller, horror, you name it. As long as it's a novel, I think the audience is going to be mostly female, unless it's on topics that men are specifically interested in. Because the content of what we read is, of course, based on what we're interested in. Paragraph 2. I see the same pattern in the creative writing program where I've taught for 8 years. About 60% of our applications come from women, and some cohorts in our program are entirely female. When I was a graduate student in a similar program about 20 years ago, the cohorts were split fairly evenly by gender. As Iman Dolan, a vice president and executive editor at Simon & Schuster, told me recently, the young male novelist is a rare species. Again, I think we need to think about marketing in this sense, and you need to think about how do people make money. A lot of people who write books have two goals. The first goal, of course, is to write because they love to write, and that's what good authors do. But also, to be a good author who has a sustainable career as an author, you have to be some kind of business person. And the business of buying and writing books needs to make sense. So if it doesn't, guess what? Nobody makes books because the publishing industry is a business. The majority of books that people buy are books that are pulp fiction, books that are easy reads. Do you know what category fits into that category of pulp fiction the easiest? It's romance novels. And who do you think are the first buyers of a romance novel? It's not Bruce Willis. And also, if you take into account the way that the Nielsen stats that we talked about before work, it also said that men do more online live streaming. So it's not that men aren't interested in certain topics, but maybe they moved on to other mediums. Whereas for books aren't as important anymore because there's other more visual options. So they don't necessarily need books in the same way because there are often explainer videos that are 1 hour, 2 hour long that men will watch all the way through and be deeply interested in and have deep conversations about things, but they're not happening with a traditional novel. Also, men have been writing, but they've been writing about other topics like finance and sports and other things that interest them. And of course, there are men who write great romance novels and great fictional novels. Publishing industry is looking at different kind of voices because that is what people have been asking for. They've been asking for a diversity of voice because after a while, we've seen enough of the same kind of story. Once you have a great example of something in literature, that example stands the test of time for a really long time until either culture changes or people's perspective changes. So what's left when you don't need great examples of new literature in the world? You have people who are writing pulp fiction, which is just easy fiction for people to read. And that again falls into various formats, whether it's fantasy or horror or romance, things that can be published really, really quickly that you don't have to think too hard about, but people can write really, really great popular novels that are very enjoyable. They're not things that are meant to be literary fiction. They're not meant to be things that'll stand the test of time for 100 years. It's just something you read at the beach. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a long history of successful female writers who financially done very, very well. Agatha Christie, Danielle Steele, Sally Rooney, Sarah J. Maas. I could go on, but there's great examples of females who have done incredible things in literary fiction, and they are very financially successful. J.K. Rowling, for heaven's sakes. I think it's actually true that it's always been the case that female writers have done well, because most female writers have done a very good job of thinking through their characters. And I have to point out that people who think that Dean Koontz and John Grisham weren't literary anomalies in what they did, they were anomalies. They were absolutely a fringe case. Male writers who became hugely popular in their genre, even someone like Stephen King, these people are fringe cases of people whose careers completely took off. Next paragraph. Male underrepresentation is an uncomfortable topic in a literary world otherwise highly attuned for such imbalances. In 2022, the novelist Joyce Carol Oates wrote on Twitter that a friend who is a literary agent told me he could not even get editors to read first novels by young white male writers, no matter how good. The public response to Miss Oates' comment was swift and cutting, not entirely without reason, as the book world does not remain overwhelmingly white, but the lack of concern about the fate of male writers was striking. For reference, I am doing a book challenge on the top 100 novels of the 20th century. And I can tell you how many of those books are by men and how many are by women. Do you want to know how many women authors are on this list? 6. There's 6 female authors on this list out of 100. This is not to say that male writers have died out. Instead, this is to say that the market is deciding what it wants. Sometimes one group gets underappreciated for another. But to say that men have had their time, they've had their time. White men have had their time writing books, and some of them were really bad. I should know. I've read a bunch of them over the last 2 years. Male writers have not died out. There are still male writers writing books. There are many popular fantasy male writers that are extremely popular right now. They're just not writing the traditional novel anymore because there are many other options available to them. But it's a trend for now, not a trend forever. Next paragraph. To be clear, I welcome the end of male dominance in literature. Men ruled the roost for far too long, too often at the expense of great women writers who ought to have been read instead. I also don't think that men deserve to be better represented in literary fiction. They don't suffer the same kind of prejudice that women have long endured. Furthermore, young men should be reading Sally Rooney and Elena Ferrante. Male readers don't need to be paired with male writers. But if you care about the health of our society, especially in the age of Donald Trump and the distorted conceptions of masculinity he helps to foster, the decline and fall of literary men should worry you. You can't in good conscience say that the fall of literary men should worry anybody. In fact, the question isn't about literary men. If they read the right kind of books, maybe they'll be the right kind of people. The reality is the world's made up of different kinds of people that have always existed. Men have always been reading. They just may have been reading nonfiction or other types of media and taking in other kinds of media that are not the traditional novel. Next paragraph, which also I find incredibly problematic. In recent decades, young men have regressed educationally, emotionally, and culturally. Among women matriculating at a 4-year public college, about half will graduate 4 years later. For men, the rate is under 40%. I'm just going to pause here and say it's possible that men drop out because they don't see the value of college, because it doesn't have a high status value and it doesn't have a high money value at the end of the day. It's just marketing that's sold to young men. This disparity surely translates to a drop-off in the number of novels young men read as they descend deeper into video games and pornography. And first of all, pornography has always been around, and guess what? There were a lot more pornography books back then. Next, video games. It's a visual medium. Men and women like it. This is something that is not news, and this is very, oh, won't anyone think of the children kind of argument. Young men will look at what they're interested in. Do you know what young men are interested in? They're interested in sex and action. And I don't think that that's a surprise to anyone. And while we're talking about porn, since you only seem to mention men and porn, do you think 50 Shades of Grey exists because it's great literature? Let's be real for one moment. Because what do you think the whole publishing industry of romance is? It's just a kind of emotional pleasure seeking, which is totally fine and totally acceptable. It's okay. We can have things like that. Honestly, this whole feeling about men and video games and pornography just strikes at the issue that only men can do sexy, bad things and women can't. It strikes a really bad balance about how we should be thinking on a whole about men and women and what they consume as literature or as media. Young men who still exhibit curiosity about the world too often seek intellectual stimulation through figures of the manosphere such as Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan. We're really talking about literary young men, which I don't even know what that is because you never defined it. But if we're talking about men who read enough, men who have literacy skills and deep thinking skills, they don't need to read a fictional book to do it. They don't need to read the best 100 novels to be a good thinker. That's not true. And I think this belief that the bourgeois or that the literary bourgeois are going to solve the problems of the world, those are usually the people who are standing in the way of solving the problems of the world. It's usually people who have a lot to lose or nothing to lose who really solve problems. And that's because these are people who've systemically been held down by people who have great careers and lots of education and a lot of money. The reason that young men believe in Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan or someone else is because men are waiting for other men to tell them interesting things. Until men do that in the form of a literary novel, they're not going to read that novel. They're just not. However, in a visual medium that's easy for men to share and understand and talk about, of course they will look at it and have something to discuss with other men, young and old. And more importantly, you're not tackling the main issue, because it's not that young men have regressed, it's that literacy rates in general have regressed. A Gallup analysis from the Department of Education in the United States collected data on literacy rates. It found that more than half, 54% of Americans read below a grade 6 level, according to a piece published in 2022 by APM Research Lab. So if you want to know why people aren't reading and there's no literary males, it's because reading is really hard, and there's so many other media choices that are much more readily available that better suits people's needs. Especially people who have any kind of special needs, that have dyslexia, that have trouble reading, and love to read if reading itself is not pleasurable. These young men need better stories from better role models, as you say, and they need to see themselves in those stories. And the reality is most young men do not see themselves in the traditional novel anymore. They see themselves elsewhere because men are concerned about prestige, making money, growing a family, having a career. These are things that matter to them. And where are you going to find that in a traditional novel? It's not really there. Novels do many things. They inspire, they puzzle you, they help you experience emotions you wouldn't otherwise experience. And men do write and dream about stories that they care about, and there are genres that exist mostly for men. And yes, some of them are very stupid, but they exist. And even if something's stupid, let people like what they like. Another paragraph. I am not saying that we should declare progress for women writers complete and now focus only on men. The question for me is, what will become of literature and indeed society if men are no longer involved in reading and writing? The fortunes of men and women are intertwined. This is why, for example, I make sure that my male students read The Handmaid's Tale. It's not just their edification that matters. Women also benefit from the existence of better men. I think no one can deny that better men is better for everyone, but I don't think they're going to get it by reading The Handmaid's Tale. In the same way that there's a certain portion of an audience in America that really strongly believes in that superhero TV show that the main bad guy is actually the good guy. So that is a problem with comprehension and literacy, and not necessarily a problem with reading the best books. It's about thinking. Here I am reminded of something the feminist scholar Bell Hooks once wrote. There remains a small strain of feminist writers who feel strongly that they have given all they want to give to men. They are concerned solely with improving the collective welfare of women. Yet life has shown me that any time a single male dares to transgress patriarchal boundaries, something I'm convinced that literature enables men to do, the lives of women, men, and children are fundamentally changed for the better. The ending of this essay is a plea for sanity where one is not needed. Yes, there's a certain spark of what happened in the American election that makes people question, what do young men actually think? I don't think what they think now has changed much in the last 5 years. The difference is they have so many different options for media, and men that you believe have good values need to be in front of that media, not somewhere else. Because in reality, the one problem that we all struggle with politically is less about what is this world with good literature or the right values or the right anything. Most people just want to put food on the table and be able to think they have a roof over their heads. And that is already a really hard thing to do as an adult. The problem of books is so very secondary to people's basic needs, especially today. And more importantly, just like at the end of this essay where we try and be told what to do, the whole point of books is the opposite of being told what to do. We can invite people to like the things we like, but they might not like them. Some men may enjoy romance novels, some may not. Some women may enjoy action thrillers, some may not. There's no rule saying we have to all like the same thing. We already know why men read certain things as opposed to read other topics. So trying to get people interested in a topic they're not normally interested in is a complete uphill battle and might go against their own interests. People read because they enjoy reading, but if the literacy rates are too low, they will not enjoy reading no matter what. That's part of the reason that other forms of entertainment exist, because some people cannot read well, and some people will never be able to read well, but that doesn't make them bad people, and that is what I think is an undertone in this entire essay. Young men, if you are reading, I applaud you. Young men, if you are not reading, I also applaud you, as long as you're living your life in a way that makes sense to you. So I don't really know where I want to end this essay exactly, but what I do want to say is that I'll link to the essay below and you can read it for yourself, and I encourage you to comment and change my mind if you think that male reading patterns are a problem, or if maybe male literacy patterns are a problem. What do you think? Because I think this subject is so important about who reads, what they read, and what literacy rates are, which I think is kind of the more important question. Okay, well, that's all for me today. I think I've talked way more than I planned to on this subject. I do think literacy rates really matter, but I don't think what we read every day matters quite so much. So, as always, I hope you're having a great week, and if you like this video, please like this video, share, and subscribe, and I would love to know your thoughts and opinions on this subject. Okay, well, thanks very much, and as always, stay curious, stay reading.